Hey, Tuan, how are you? Thank you for coming on today. It's like the third or fourth time you've been on the show. I really enjoy having you, and there's big news today, and I can't wait to get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, Kenneth. It's so wonderful to be back. This is one of my favorite places, and I feel always so lucky and grateful to be talking with you and your audience.
So, before we get started, can you give me a little bit of background? Because I know nothing about the San Francisco World Spirit Competition.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting, like in our space, when it comes to food and beverage, the food industry really gets a lot of attention, and that's normal, of course. And I think for beverage alcohol is our category, it's a little bit less amount of attention, but that doesn't sort of take away the importance of the San Francisco International Spirits Competition. It's one of the world's largest and most prestigious. So for us, it's kind of like our Oscars. It's very intense. First of all, the judges are screened and to be invited to be a part of the judging panel. And there's hundreds of judges um, for each category. And on top of that, it's 3 days of blind testing. So it's quite rigorous.
That sounds like a lot of work on the organizer's part. Do you know sort of when you're talking about like a blind test? I mean, this is happening locally in San Francisco, and they're bringing blind sort of like samples put in front of the judges. This sounds like a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. Amanda Blue, the president, and her team, they spend, a year. This is all they do. This is what they focus on. And it's not only, and, I think it's really important to understand that these submissions, they come in not just from the United States, it's global. And these are coming in from all over the world. So they're working across multiple time zones, her and her team organizing it. And at the same time, the judges are also coming in from all over the world. So these are the world's best palates and leading experts coming in to be part of this competition.
When you think about like the James Beard or the Michelin, those kinds of awards sound like it's just maybe two guys going into a restaurant or three guys, randomly just going into restaurants and testing out the food, writing up the report, then going back to wherever they came from and making decisions. This is a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, Michelin is huge organization, in comparison to San Francisco's international competition, which is still large. Michelin is very interesting because it's not centralized where everything is sent. They actually have to send out the people who are evaluating restaurants, local communities are actually traveling, so that is also a year-round effort. But I think for this one, just because the nature of beverage alcohol is all packaged, they have that luxury of being able to send everything to one location.
Yeah, that makes sense. You hear about the Michelin situation in Vietnam just recently?
I believe we received well, yes, Michelin is back, right, in Vietnam. And that's an interesting relationship, right? Like, between us and the French, and to have them sort of come back because, Michelin tires, they had plantations in Vietnam, and the historical relationship hasn't been great. But like us, like, it's like Gemini, two things can be true at once, and they're there to really bring a lot of recognition. It's really going to help those chefs and restaurants and the business and the tourism. But yeah, I've been tracking. We've won some stars. It's amazing.
The irony of the French validating the food, the Vietnamese food. It's such a weird twist, but all right, we'll take it, right?
I mean, again, that's just one of those things of like we just have to sort of accept things that just aren't ideal. We actually don't need the French to validate, like we already know. And and of course the French already know, otherwise they wouldn't have, colonized us, and like they wouldn't have known the value. I mean, look at what drives their fragrance industry, right? It's all of our botanicals that comes from our country, so of course they know. We've made the millions of dollars. I mean, the brand Deep Teak has two two fragrances that are actually Vietnamese names, right? So it's like, and so many of their other fragrances too. But yeah, it is a very interesting relationship we have with them.
We're gonna go into a little rabbit hole with fragrances. I had a guest come on recently, and he manages all the luxury brands. He's the head country director for Lux Asia, and we had this conversation about fragrance, cosmetics, beauty, and the idea of European houses being sort of the pinnacle of the the ultimate mark. And I was like, does Vietnam? I mean, because he brought up the whole thing about Vietnamese production and fragrances and aromatics coming from Vietnam, and but we could do the same thing. But I asked him, well, what about the branding side? He's like, we could brand just as good, but the problem is what happens, and I think this is tied to Michelin, is that you have stratas of years and decades of history of PR and media work that enables these brands to have layers, and you can't just be a country like Vietnam, brand new, I mean, relatively new, supplying to the world of fragrance and beauty, and then make a mark. It takes, he said, it was like, and I think this is his opinion, and I think it's valid, but it's like 100 years of that layering of making sure that aesthetically everything's coming out like a brand like Louis Vuitton or, Gucci and, these European companies.
No, absolutely. First of all, I would love to meet him and I would love to talk with him for starters. Number two, yes, I hear what he's saying. And to build that sort of value and that cultural authority, those brands, yeah, they have a century. And, it's really interesting. In fragrance in particular, many of those European brands started like as handcrafted. They were making like leather goods for horses, bridles, and then, and it just slowly they expanded their product line and they became authorities on all things, the finer things in life, right? And it became luxury living. What I will say is we live in a time of different marketing and strategies and techniques where there can be a lot of acceleration and cultural value can be established quicker. Oft, I know you and I personally, we spoke about this and also on another podcast conversation. We often look to Korea and what has happening there. So in 3 generations, I would say probably in like a very shorter amount of time compared to a century worth of brand building, Korean products and services that come out of there are now being established as high value, right? So their value has increased. I think it wouldn't need take a century. And I think for Vietnam in particular, I think we can become that authority figure to the global audience in a shorter amount of time. For example, Italy doesn't even grow coffee, right? And they've become authorities that somehow, when you look to Italian critics and voices, they know what they're talking about, right? And Italian coffee brands are seen as the best. What's really interesting about us, we actually grow coffee. And so this is where I think the acceleration can happen. And I think with really great smart communication, we can quickly have that seat at the table at the top. And I know we can do that, and also in fragrance too as well.
I try to keep a very positive outlook as much as I can, but when you say that, it reminds me of tennis shoes. We don't have our own brand coming out of Vietnam, yet we make tennis shoes for the entire world, right? You think about it.
Absolutely.
Same way.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. We have all the pieces to the puzzle, right? We have all the parts. I think what's happening right now is actually something very exciting that's part of the larger Asian American movement that we've been seeing. And then, of course, we are one thread within that greater ecosystem. But I think Vietnam in particular, it's very exciting from an entrepreneurial standpoint and identifying opportunities. And I think we see a lot of activity in the next 5 to 10 years. Kenneth, we're going to see some exceptional movement.
Yeah, if you think about it, we were coming out of a place where we didn't have factory production. We didn't have lines of manufacturing, but we have that now. What we need though is ownable exports. And I've had guys like George Wynn come on, branding experts talking about this idea of ownable exports. K-pop coming out of Korea is an ownable export. And I'm going to drive this home all the time. And that's why I love having guys like you and George on the podcast, because we can talk about the lack of brand awareness of a product that comes from Vietnam. Yet we're making growing coffee, we're making these tennis shoes, we're making handbags, but there is no direct ownable brands, ownable exports that we actually have. So we really have to start focusing our attention and thinking about this. But like the country director for Lex Asia was saying, things like fragrance and beauty takes 100 years, because that there's layers of pounding the media and PR. But I think you're right that the time can be compressed now due to social media with things like tennis shoes and handbags.
Absolutely. I would, first of all, I would love to talk with him again. And I would challenge that a little bit, because there's the brand Le Labo, right? Which exited very quickly. Le Labo was really launched here in the United States, and they were able to build themselves up as an aspirational brand. They're expensive. You might have seen them around. They had a couple of beautiful brick and mortar stores here in Los Angeles, of Silver Lake and Venice. And so I think what you can do is you can absolutely, through brand creativity, owning the story, telling a powerful story well and consistently, that you actually can establish yourself, that it will not take a century. Now, if you want to be an established estate brand like Louis Vuitton, yes, of course, there's some things that there's no real substitution for a natural time like that. A century of brand building is a century of brand building, but you can quickly become a respected brand in that space, without needing a century's worth of effort and time. So I think in Vietnam's case, because we have all the pieces to the puzzle, the country itself is centuries year old, right? So when it comes to fragrance, we already have that story in place. So we actually have that time invested. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That it's already there. And so I agree with you that I think the next stage for Vietnam is we're going to be owning the brand, and we're actually going to be owning it, the entire company and process. Because you're right, we manufactured, we do this for others, and we let them brand our natural resources. We let them brand our infrastructure. They come in, they leverage everything, the production, and then they just brand it, and all that upside and value goes outside of our community. But I think what's about to happen, we're definitely on the verge and seeing a big shift here.
Don't get me started on the rubber plantations.
I know, same. I
In
know.
Nong Khai and Long Can and all these beautiful places, there are so many rubber plantations. And when you're driving through them, it's just infinite amounts of rubber trees. And then you think back to the French doing business, and it's like slave labor wages, in those days, and taking over. And and go back to the whole idea of Michelin, as a rubber company.
I know.
So ironic.
I know they were abusive, right? And having them come back, and what I'm very curious to know is if they're going to acknowledge that in some way, and and that would be helpful in sort of moving forward. And I think for me personally, to be sort of accepting Michelin come in, and I mean, listen, Michelin is also, they stand to benefit from this too as well, right? And it's not just altruistic as they come in there, but just acknowledging the full history would be helpful. I mean,
Yep.
of course, it's here to stay. Michelin's here to stay. It's not going to go anywhere, and it really does help those businesses. But yes, we cannot forget what they did historically. We cannot. And I think just knowing that holistically, we'll just have a better relationship moving forward.
As we discuss this idea of branding and we discuss this idea of layering months and years and decades of PR and branding, your win at this competition is a big deal for Vervet. So when I think about like these single wins or, it takes years to get more of these wins, how much help does it really pour into the brand?
It really helps bring awareness to the brand. I think that's the biggest first step for us is that awareness. And, of course, as being in business, you want that awareness to convert to revenue. So we don't know. This is a first. This is a new thing. And for us to see if how this is really going to impact our business. I will say the immediate impact that it has with us is in our specific industry, and it's taking notice. Like, whoa, what's going on here, and to see that happen. So we actually feel the effect first amongst the trade and the industry, and so you get that industry trade and respect, and that's really where the sort of the conversation begins. And then hopefully that gets pushed out slowly out to the consumer level. I think one part of what San Francisco International Spirits competition does really well is, they want to have that awareness just like James Beard and Michelin does too, to them and what they're doing. So they've been doing a lot of outreach to media platforms so that they can bring attention, because they know how hard all of these people and creators that work in beverage alcohol spend on this, and capturing the mind share of the general public would really be great, so that this competition itself can reach that same level of attention as Michelin and James Beard. But Forbes has really been all of it. So many media publications has been increasingly covering this. I think for us, it means a lot, of course, for the brand and our company to have that, to receive this award and all the attention. But I think most importantly, we just feel that it's a huge success and win. I'm of mixed mind on this, right? On one hand, yes, it's great. We are the first Vietnamese owned brand to achieve this in the history of the competition. Significant. We broke a bamboo ceiling. At the same time, we're the first, and that's not a good data point. It would be so different if I was, standing here sharing this news and, I was like the 50th, but that's not the case. And so if anything, the impact that we really want to have is to inspire all creators out there that's hearing and listening to this right now, no matter what industry and category or service that you're working in. The sooner we get to the first, the sooner we get to the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth and the sixth, So that for us is, that for us is like defines our success.
What is the steps to enter the competition? How does this all work?
Oftentimes we were invited, but there is an open call. And like anything, there's a long application process, and very, carefully laid out, as they want to know a lot about your product, very detail oriented, not just website information. They want to know a lot about the team and, how everything is produced, and where, and, where you're getting, ingredients, how things are made. And then, you send everything up to San Francisco, and you do that months in advance. And then from then you just sort of pace around like an expecting parent, like just waiting for them. And then all the judges arrive, they fly in. Like I said, it's a 3-day competition. And that's really where it sort of begins. And then they contact you usually like 4 to 6 weeks after that.
That's a funny analogy, an expecting parent, but well, that's funny. Good analogy.
Yeah.
So, when I think about Vervet or, our other wonderful Daniel Huaitin over at Songkai, I think about good alcohol, good clubs, good music, good arts, good film, good writing. These are all like temporary holding spaces when you're at the top or when you're winning things, right? What do you think the ones that actually sustain over many, many years, like LV or Gucci or any of these brands of human beings or actual entities that are creating these ideas of what we just see? What do you think the common thing with the staying power is?
Quality products for one. And that is, you need that no matter what, and a powerful brand story and communications and how they tell their story is really important. And because in telling that story really determines if the audience accepts it. And if they do accept it, then they invest and buy into the brand and it continues to expand. And of course, luck. I think
Luck.
that is it. What is the definition of success? It's like, when
Preparation.
preparation meets opportunity, right? And I think that's it. And that last part, luck, is something that you can't, it's an external factor,
Somebody asked me that about my guest the other night at dinner. I was at a dinner over the weekend, and somebody said, "So all of these people that you've interviewed, what is the common denominator?" And I instantly came out of my mouth, "It's luck," because there's plenty of people who are better than some of these musicians or singers or whatever that don't get recognized, and then there's people who are like really bad that are doing really well. And there are these stories of people who are in these positions like directors or actors or whatever who didn't start out to do that. They were accidentally, or something happened, they just got called upon, they showed up, right place, right time, and they were practicing this thing, and then they got asked to do that thing. And so I attribute even the whole idea of like practicing or whatever, sometimes that's not even the case. You're like going along thinking you're going to be a writer, and then all of a sudden, your friend says, "Oh my God, I need you to take me to this audition for an acting thing." And then they become an actor on accident. There's so much of that happening. And I feel like sometimes we can only just do what we know how to do right in front of us and just kind of ride these weird life waves.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think that's why it's so important, is like how we define success,
Yeah.
and how we as individuals define success. That's very important, because sometimes there's this notion of success. It's like this financial and fame success. And that is definitely one version and definition of success. But because, like you said, you could be doing one thing and all of a sudden something else happens, but that was never your individual definition of success. It accidentally happened. Um, but it is absolutely true. Luck is such a unknown and a large factor in all of this. And that's something, it's a complete mystery. It's you just have to keep your head down and just do what you do. If and no matter what, if you get up and do that every day, and that's your definition of success, right? And
Yep.
and you succeeded on a daily basis. All that other, that may or may not happen. So you just have to be happy with what you're doing on a day-to-day basis.
So when I think about a competition like this and you win it, I think about distribution companies, alcohol distributors calling up and saying, "Hey, we want your product," or, a bar or whatever. And I feel like when they start reaching out, and it sort of like starts to kind of fall in line with year after year, you kind of get more distributors and you get more volume out there. And luck, and this is just my question and my thoughts, is does luck in your situation right now happen when like Coca-Cola calls up and say, "Oh, by the way, I just happened to be a rep for Coca-Cola and I saw and then they call you up and they're like, "I want to buy the company." Is that sort of like the idea? I know this is really basic thinking, but is that sort of the idea of luck happening in your situation?
That would be, if anything like that, absolutely, that would fall into that category. Some angel of luck in the universe, decided to grant that to happen, of course, that is, yeah, that would be in our case, that would be like winning the lottery,
Okay.
Um,
Now, if that's winning the lottery, what are sort of like some of the stages that happen before that happens for a company at your size and stage?
oh, so many things that needs to happen. We remain a very early stage company. Scaling in CPG, consumer packaged goods is hard, but scaling in beverage alcohol is even more challenging because it's government regulated. And everything that we do is it's so cash intensive. And it's also requires a lot of so much physical activity. It's just exhausting. We have digital marketing and field marketing, which is all in-person type of activations like samplings and demos and talking and meeting and educating. Marketing for us is educating. It needs to be that way. And of course, we have limited resources, both cash and people. So it is many, many things needs to happen. I guess I could give you a picture. You could measure this by what we, in our industry call depletions, and how many case depletions month on month, year by year. And I think what needs to happen there is, reaching for Coca-Cola to call, for them to even be interested would probably be like 50 million in sales. That's something crazy. I mean, maybe they might be interested earlier, like at 15 million in sales. I don't know. It'd be up to that, M&A team, but it would have to be, I would say that those type of conversations probably don't really begin till 10 million and above.
I'm glad that we are now getting into the technical weeds because my question starts to happen like this. Where do you get that sort of knowledge, that mentorship to kind of understand the mechanical side of this back end? Because without that information as a Vietnamese founder in CPGs or in alcohol, you're kind of like wandering because my dad was like that, 25 years ago. He was like, I'll just go out and make some shit, right? But that's not the way we should be doing things. We should really be thinking that there are ways that people ahead of us have gone down and done this. And, I've talked to guys from Redboat. I've talked to people in other beverage companies or CPG companies. And I think that these game plans with a sort of like a structure, because I'm sure that there's guys that can flip a bank, buy a struggling bank, flip it, and do that 4 times. I know the guy over at there's a big bank called Genesis who does that for a living. It's a big bank. And if you have a playbook, right, in your industry, you could work up and go, okay, here are the pieces, here are the contacts, and here is the numbers that I need to hit. Is that something that is easy to follow for you?
It is followed to me because luckily I was able to get access to this information that, other people have, right? Historically excluded groups who are often, didn't have access to
Yeah.
this type of information. But luckily things have changed in the last couple of years, and that has, allowed us access to have this information. So, there's definitely, MBAs that we have access to, but more importantly, within beverage and alcohol CPG, I've been able to, gain this information through business accelerators and, that are really sort of tied to CPG. Of course, that's why I think I really want to give back. And as if I can help any CPG creators and founders out there, please, get in touch with me. But it is, and you're absolutely right. I think what you just described, I know in personal conversation between you and I, we often talk about like sometimes there's that adage, measure 3 times, cut once. And sometimes Vietnamese are like, no, just cut, figure it out later, and I think you're absolutely right. We absolutely do need to be a lot more strategic in our thinking, understanding what type of, in this space, what type of business, what the actual goals are, and where it becomes, and making sure that we're working up to, if there is an exit strategy, if it is, for example, a company designed for exit, then what kind of case volumes, working backwards from there to make sure that we have a solid plan in product, sales, marketing, and operations that is all aligned towards that goal. And actually knowing the spreadsheet side of your business, your forecasting and your planning is essential. It's information. It makes your crystal ball less blurry.
Mm-hmm.
And it also provides guidance for the team. Then everyone knows what they're doing. And everyone's not just sort of like flying by the seat of their pants on a day-to-day basis. Like, oh, we'll just figure it out today. We'll just, you're just grinding with no North Star.
Remind what you just said about measure three times, cut once. I put it into a Vietnamese term, like the word "thin" is to calculate, to figure out, right? So it's like one of my friends would say, like, buy now, thin sao, or cut now, thin sao. That's sort of like the way the Vietnamese are. It's like cut now, thin sao, figure it out later. It's like that's not the way we should be doing. We should be calculating over and over and over and over before we cut.
Absolutely. If you have a lot of wood to chop, Kenneth, spend most of your time sharpening your axe,
yeah.
right? And it is. And I know you and I are both in conversations and involved in our community, both in, here in the United States diaspora, but also back in Vietnam. And I know we see this all the time where like, people are not spending enough time sharpening their axe before they chop wood. And things get things get even more difficult because even when you do sharpen your axe to chop wood, things can still go wrong, right?
Will go wrong, yeah.
And so, it doesn't make sense to even introduce a lot more risk in the beginning when you don't have to, because this whole thing is so risky no matter what. There's plenty of risk, even with the sharpest axe, plenty of risk. So you want to keep it to a minimum.
So as we were talking earlier before we got on the podcast, there actually is a few more alcohol companies. And I want to talk about this right now because I want to hear what you think about this idea. So there's Vervet with you. There's Song Kai with Daniel. A new company. She's been around since 2017. A new cognac company called Exto. Elegant design. Elegant. She's from France. Sabrina Zung. And the fourth one that I have off the top of my head is Suti. It's Suti Roudet Distillery out of Dallas, Texas. So there's like four now. Now, if the four of you founders would get together in a club setting, sort of like, get on a Zoom call every week and share notes, is that an abundance mentality act? Like, does that help the four companies grow in unison with each other? Or do you find that to be tough because there's like trade secrets, although the four alcohol companies are completely different from each other, right? You're different. Suti Roudet is, it's like almost like a whiskey or rice wine package, and some guy is a gin, and so they're all very different facets of the alcohol business. But if you guys all got together in a room once a month and shared notes and distributor stores and stuff like that, would that help the four companies or would that not help them? I'm just curious what you think.
Absolutely. I'm a big believer in collective intelligence and abundance thinking. So absolutely that would help. And, I think of those that you just mentioned, I talk with Daniel the most. But yes, absolutely. That's a great idea. And I'm in full support of it. And to the four that you named, I'd love to shout out Duen Ha of Banda Wines. She's doing French natural wines. So there's five now. And I absolutely believe that. And I know that, even knowing Duen, and I think, I would assume that I think all of us would probably feel the same. It would be great for all of us to get together and talk, because it's basically, we could really help each other, like distributor management strategies. There's just so many ways how we can come together and help optimize our businesses in a way where we can protect our resources and gain acceleration. Absolutely. And share strategies. So no, that's deeply valuable. And I would go even further and say that would be valuable no matter if you're in beverage alcohol, whatever your industry or category is. It would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think this needs to happen ASAP. I'll make the introductions because I think the reason why you said this is triggering in my mind what you said about CPGs is hard to do, but when you do CPGs on top, alcohol on top of the CPG, it's even harder. So there's got to be some kinship with all the alcohol makers, all the Vietnamese alcohol makers, right? Because let's face it. I mean, why is it the government so controlling with alcohol? You know,
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a lot of kinship. I think oftentimes when we get together, even when I get together with beverage alcohol founders, outside of the Vietnamese space, you oftentimes we do spend a lot of time going through our pain points and, commiserating together on the difficulties of this and the three-tier system and the government regulation. And every state is different and has its own complexity. So if you are distributed in more than one state, not every state has the similar laws. So it makes it all very difficult. And I think the most difficult thing is there may or may not be a lot of value in educating the consumer on all of this because, why would they care? Maybe we shouldn't even expect them to care, right? But I think this really does impact like how we spend, what kind of margins that we can expect, and everything down to COGS. And I think COGS is like where kind of the companies are I think that's like a foundational to a company, right? That's where the company really sort of begins as a business and the revenue side, because the reason why it's so important is you need as much money as possible in marketing and distributor support and field marketing. So it's beverage alcohol has a lot of challenges, but it's definitely those government regulations. Even with e-commerce, like we're so completely different. It costs us so much more to have an e-commerce offering to our customers. It really does cost the brand a lot.
why? Why? What? It's. I mean, if you think about it, you're sending out like let's say a case of four, right? I mean, I'm just riffing here. There's four cans in a case, and it's a case with liquid inside, and you're sending it out. Why is it so difficult and different than a case with toys inside of it?
The difference is a company that is selling toys to you can sell to you directly, right? So therefore their retail price and that they're selling to you, they're capturing more revenue. So they're able to do that. For us, it's very different in beverage alcohol. So we cannot sell to you directly. We have to work with an e-commerce partner. So we have to sell to them at the wholesale level. And so that's where we stop earning money. And then they put their markup on it because it is illegal in the United States for beverage alcohol to sell directly to you. For us, for brands like us, there is a couple of exceptions. For example, if you own and operate a winery, you can sell to the public. Even with a distillery, though, if you own and operate a distillery, there's a temporary law that allows them to sell directly to the public, but that could end because that was a COVID privilege, but it actually hasn't been ratified into law. The other complexity is there's a difference between beer, wine products, and spirit products. But for a majority of brands like us who don't actually own a production facility, we have to partner with these e-com partners, and we sell to them. That's when we stop earning money. So that wholesale price is very low, and of course, and then on top of that, like oftentimes consumers may expect us to pay for shipping and 10%, 15% discounts. That e-commerce partner will calculate all of those costs, and then we receive a bill at the end of the month. So I think that's common for all CPG, but I think what's very different for us is we're actually not truly D2C. We're actually not actually selling to you directly. I'm actually selling to a third party who then turns around and sells it to the public. Our website, it appears that we're selling to the public, but we're not.
Okay, so this sounds pretty arcane to me, and but it maybe not. Maybe there's some tax logic, maybe there's some morality logic. Where do these laws come from? How is it that again, why can toys be sold directly to me and alcohol cannot? And why does it need to go? I mean, even the complexity of like being an actual winery. What's the difference between some guy who's packaging alcohol versus the guy who's growing grapes on a vine?
The government makes these calls, and a lot of it is just happening at the business level. Lobbyists, become successful and getting and updating the code to different industries' benefits. Everything is fought. Like right now, there's a bill before the California, Senate, and it would allow 10% and under ABV products, alcohol by volume products. It doesn't matter if it's beer, wine, or spirits, to be sold under one license, beer, wine. That would be huge for companies like mine. However, the beer wine industry is fighting it because they don't want distilled spirits to have that same privilege that they've been enjoying. All of this goes back to prohibition. So before then, alcohol was not regulated, and our country decided that's not a good idea. It's we see this kind of as a drug, and then ultimately it was prohibited. And when prohibition ended, and they're like, okay, we're going to allow alcohol back into our country, but this time with regulation. And that's where it all is rooted from. And over the decades, it's been updated and changed, and some areas of the law gets updated, others are really arcane, and it just lags behind. It's so complex now, and it's like the tax code. Will someone come along and eventually simplify this? I don't have a lot of hope for it, and but it is what it is, and I think that's what makes beverage alcohol so complex. And it'll be like that for cannabis too. Cannabis is also complex. There's government regulation in there too, and companies and brands that work in that space have to deal with so much complexity as well.
It's just so crazy to me when you think about alcohol and how it's actually made. It's like moonshine in Vietnam, Rudé is made in people's backyards. It's not that difficult to make. And we've lost that sort of like that ability to make it. Beer is not that difficult to make either. I mean, there's a process, and of course, there's master brewers. It's complicated, of course, at the high levels, but the basics of making and fermenting alcohol is not that difficult. And it's just perplexing to me that the government throughout the entire world, not just the US, is so involved in our lives when it comes to the production of alcohol or cannabis. Cannabis grows on trees. I mean, why is it, this is a philosophical question, it's a rhetorical, exercise here, that it just blows my mind that there's just so much to these, there's just so much laws and regulations around these things when, you're out to just make money, and, everybody should just be given a chance to produce and make it all at the same time. It might be too simplistic of me to put it out there that way, but it's how I feel sometimes.
No, absolutely. I share your frustration, and it is, yeah, of course, it's also rooted in money too. I mean, alcohol historically, although I think drinking habits are changing, so it'll be interesting to see, the total revenue of alcohol in general in the country, but there's a lot of money to be made. And, of course, the government wants a piece of it. I mean, we have alcohol tax, right? And the alcohol tax on beer, wine products are different than distilled spirits. Distilled spirits is taxed at a higher rate, than beer, wine, but beer and wine has higher volume, right? So I'm sure those industry voices really sort of negotiated hard for that. But yeah, because they say, listen, you're going to get your money. We have higher volume, but if you could just lower our tax a little bit, and we, we're producing products with lower alcohol in it anyway. But it is, yeah, it's taxes, and that's a big part. I know beverage alcohol generates a lot of tax for local, state, and our national government. So that is a big part of it too. So there's a lot of groups that can stand to gain, financially. So that really sort of adds to all of this.
Here's a question that I want to kind of like bring up all the time when I'm talking to you. Sort of like a gut check, right? You've been at this for a few years. What keeps it exciting for you, and what keeps you up at night?
Okay, great question. What keeps me excited and remains exciting is our values, right? I remember I had an early mentor when I first started, and he said, "What you'll realize, what you're doing with this company is you're scaling your values." And he could not have been more right. And I know, for us, we're mission-driven founders, and like before we created a product, we created our values. And in some ways, that is our product, is our values. And we took those values and we translated it into cocktails, but our company values can actually translate into anything.
Mm.
It could be a guitar, it could be anything. It could be clothes, it could be fragrance, it could be tennis shoes, sneakers, right? It's the same values. So that's what keeps me excited, is continuing to scale our values. What keeps me up at night is the marketplace, which is the external factors, everything that I cannot control. And that's what keeps me up at night. What is happening at the purchasing level, at the wholesale purchasing level, and at the consumer level, what's happening in the marketplace. We know that as you build a company, you go through stages. We have incredible values that it's our personal values. We're very proud of those. We're very proud of the product that we built, our cocktails, our drinks. So much intentionality went into it. We took our time with it. We worked on this for close to 2 years on our cocktails, just working on a product and building a brand from the values of our product and the values of us as a company. But the marketplace building is different because that we're not really involved only to a certain degree. We can only do so much. The marketplace is wild. And that's what keeps me up at night. And is the revenue coming in where we can become a sustainable business someday. Early stage companies, you're not sustainable, you're not profitable, and you want to get there as fast as possible. And that's really left up to the marketplace, wholesale buyers, the consumers, and they're evaluating our price point. And those are the things that keeps me up at night.
And is it like a tree where you just add water and fertilizer and it grows? Is there things that you can do in your control that can accelerate the growth of Vervet?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that hopefully we're doing everything, but some things you're limited with, right? Because you have limited resources, you have limited funding, you have limited people. So you do as much as you possibly can. And of course, you can always do more to accelerate. The truth of the matter in beverage alcohol is, even to get to the first significant stage where you can become a valuable company, you would need a minimum of 10 million of investment capital, to get to something really where it becomes really interesting, to potential buyers. There's a lot of beverage alcohol brands, Kenneth, there's a lot. So even if you become a $5 to $10 million business, which is sort of that early stage, there's a lot of alcohol brands at that level. And so as people, that are in M&A and shopping around, they have a lot of choices, even at that revenue level. And it's all fickle, what they want to buy, depending on what opportunities they feel like that they can continue meeting. But yeah, absolutely. There's many things that you can do to accelerate, and creativity is one. We have that resource. But I think where we're limited, of course, is it's all early stage companies. It's capital. It's just, and to get there. And of course, you want your business to generate its own capital so that you can become less dependent on investment capital. Of course, that's always the goal for the company to sustain itself. But that's a lot of things that sort of needs to happen. But beverage alcohol is just very cash intensive.
Let's end our time by going back to the beginning, which is the competition and the prizes that you won. And can you tell me a little bit about what categories and how this exactly what you were given from the competition, what you were
Yeah,
awarded?
yeah, absolutely. We received 4 medals, which is great. So all of our drinks received a medal except for one. Our yuzu sake tonic, which we're so proud of, won a double gold. And what this really means is, and double golds, is the highest medal that you can receive. Now, there is the biggest honor, and that is best in class, and that's similar to like best picture, right? So we will not find out until June 17th of if we received that, but we're we're one of we're we're one of 5 brands that is in the running for best in class, and our category is called RTD in the industry. That means ready to drink. um these are basically all prepared cocktails. And there was over 550 submissions around the world.
For
And
RTD?
yeah,
Oh,
absolutely. Over
wow.
550. And for us to now be in the top 5 for best in class is,
It's a huge.
like I said, yeah, it's for us, that's more than a win, to be in that, that's pretty rarefied air for us. And I'm so happy to represent the Vietnamese creative entrepreneurial community, and I'm proud to represent California and Los Angeles, in the running in this category. So fingers crossed, that happens. But I can say, in talking to, with us and my team, it's already a win, where to be to be one of the 5 in best in classes feels tremendous, and we're very, very proud of that.
Well, good luck June 17th. I mean, this is happening in Vegas, I believe.
Yeah, it is. It's a big, it's a huge gala for our trade. But yeah, all happening in Vegas.
Oh, that sounds like a fun event.
Yes.
And I wish you the best. And again, even if there is nothing, even if there's nothing beyond the conversation of what we are talking about today, getting to where you are right now in that competition is a massive win.
Yeah, absolutely. I look back at our entire journey, and here we
Yeah.
are. Like it really is amazing considering where it started. Like everything, it starts on a napkin, right? I think about where we're at our napkin stage and what we've achieved between then and now. Like it is already a rich and fulfilling journey. And I'm very, very grateful for it.
Tuan, thank you so much once again.
Thank you, Kenneth.
Thank you for listening to The Vietnamese with Kenneth Nguyen. Special thanks to Brittany Tran, to Jane Nguyen, Catherine Nguyen, Tina Pham, Sydney Jamie, and Christo Trin. Please find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at The Vietnamese Podcast.